It's a political philosophy that wants to maximize individual liberty and minimize government. We believe in self-ownership. We believe that every individual owns his own life, his own body, the fruits of his own labor, and that these are fundamental human rights that nobody should violate, including the government.
So if libertarianism is trying to pay as little tax as possible, do you not find yourself in a situation where you get what you pay for?
Well, there's many reasons why we're opposed to taxation. The first reason is a moral reason. We believe taxation is immoral. We believe that every individual has a right to his own life and therefore a right to the fruits of his labor, a right to his property, and that it is morally wrong to take somebody's property against their will. And that is what taxation is. Taxation is a legalized form of robbery.
What changes would libertarianism bring to Europe?
Well, first of all, we'd have a lot more freedom. It would mean that people would now control their own lives. They control their own destinies. They could decide for themselves what it is they want to do with the fruits of their own labor. They no longer have a government that's taking half of what they earn. What would he get? What do we get in return? We get streets, we get highways filled with traffic jams. We get hospitals with waiting lines. We get schools that are very expensive, but the quality of these schools is not all that great. We get an army of bureaucrats whose job is to make new rules, and they keep making new rules all the time.
What are the main problems facing Europe right now?
The problem is caused because of our financial system, because the government has created a monopoly, a government monopoly of money creation. There was a time when money was gold, and when money was gold coins, there was no inflation. There was deflation, in fact. One coin of gold could buy you more and more over time because the production levels were rising much faster than the amount of gold in the world. And in those days, there were no depressions, there were no big recessions. That started when money started changing, when people took their gold to the bank and received in return a bank note, or received in return an account with a credit in the account. When that started happening, banks became influenced in the sense that they receive an incentive to start handing out loans to people that weren't actually covered by gold. They just created money out of thin air, and that's what caused inflation. And then some banks started to go bankrupt. There were bank runs when people found out that their bank had created so much money out of thin air that their gold backing was so low that it became a risk to keep your money in that bank. And when that happened, banks started lobbying with the government to create a central bank. And the purpose of the central bank was to make rules that all the banks now had to follow as to how much they could inflate, how much money they could print out of thin air, so that all the banks would inflate together at the same rate, so that the risk of bank runs would now disappear. And that's what's happened. And as a result, inflation has become rampant. If you look at the value of our currency today and compare it to the value of our currency 100 years ago, about 99% of the value of the currency has disappeared. And that's because of inflation. And that's because the government has allowed banks to create money out of thin air. It's a government-issued privilege to the banks, and the banks are happy to take advantage of it. And of course, government has monopolized the creation of money. Now only the central bank has a right to create money. And central banks do what is called quantitative easing, which is a very nice word. What it really means is creating money out of thin air. You could actually call it counterfeit money. Because what is counterfeit money? It's money that isn't backed by anything. It's just a worthless piece of paper. But that's what the government is doing to us. And we all understand that counterfeiting is a bad thing. And why is it a bad thing? Because the counterfeiter gets something for nothing. And all the people who have saved money lose out. When counterfeiting is allowed to occur, and a lot of people start counterfeiting, what it means is all the people that have saved their money are now losing, and the counterfeiters are getting something for nothing. And it's very distortive because people now receive an incentive to become counterfeiters themselves rather than do productive work. But that's exactly what the government does with central banking. The government has now a monopoly in counterfeiting. They have the right to create money out of thin air, just worthless pieces of paper. And as a result, all the people who saved money are watching their savings disappear. Their savings become worth less and less. And the government is getting something for nothing. And it's very distortive because now a lot of people stop doing productive work. They start working for the government, or they start selling services or products to the government. They become part of the military-industrial complex to make money off government. So it's a very distortive process. And not only is it distortive, but it creates the business cycle, because when central banks inflate, create huge amounts of money out of thin air, they create bubbles. And these bubbles cannot last forever. They must burst. And when the bubble bursts, that's when we have a recession. That's when we have a depression. It is really very comparable to an alcoholic who drinks too much alcohol and is then the next day he has a hangover. That's basically what our recession is. It's the hangover, and the money creation, the credit expansion is like the boost. That's the boost that alcohol also gives you. And the problem that alcoholics have is that when they are getting a hangover, they are very tempted to take more alcohol because then they can delay the effects of the hangover. And that's what our governments are doing as well. Our central banks are trying to solve the crisis by printing even more money. But that only makes the problem worse in the long run. It's only a very temporary measure, but it's only kicking the can down the road. So the only real solution to this problem is to end this government privilege of creating money out of thin air and go back to a situation where money is worth something, where money is covered by something. It can be gold, it could be silver, it could be any other thing that has intrinsic value. But as long as government is allowed to keep on printing counterfeit money, that's worth nothing, whose only value is based on the fact that they have a monopoly on creating it, and they can put anybody in jail who does counterfeiting except themselves. As long as that is the basis of our money, we'll be in this business cycle.
Why should libertarian principles be used to help solve the problems in Europe?
The free market is the best system that we have to create products and services, to enrich our lives, to make sure that we live long and happy and prosperous lives. Because the free market is a system that is based on voluntary cooperation. In a free market, every transaction between two or more people requires the voluntary consent of each of the people involved. And that means that they all expect to be better off. They all expect to be happier as a result. So as a result, any transaction in a free market is bound to add to the happiness and prosperity of the individual people involved in the transaction. And when you allow an entire nation to reap the benefits of the free market, everybody in the long run will benefit and become better off and lead happier and more prosperous lives. And government intervention always goes against that principle. Government intervention is based on force.
Would you say that modern-day Europe has drifted away from liberty?
There's a lot of positive developments, but there's also negative developments. Where it comes to privacy, our right to privacy versus the government, that's a right that is completely being eradicated over the last 30 years. The government has the idea that they have the right to know everything, and that either we have nothing to hide, in which case we don't need privacy, or we have something to hide, in which case we don't deserve privacy. So when politicians talk about privacy and new privacy laws, they're always talking about how privacy should be protected amongst the people, how corporations and companies should be stopped from invading the privacy of citizens. But government intervention of our privacy, that's something that is occurring more and more over the last 30 years. Another very worrisome development is the European Union. Because up until now, let's say actually up until 1992 is a better year to pick, the European Economic Community, the EEC, was a force for the good. At the time, what the EEC did was reduce trade barriers to zero, reduce tariffs to zero, reduce trade quotas to zero, and promote things like a free movement of capital and people and goods and services. That was a good idea. At the time, the EC was advancing individual liberty. That's changed. That project basically was finished in 1992, and what those European bureaucrats should have done is said, okay, our job is done, let's all go home, let's find a real job, let's do productive work. That's not what happened. What happened is that the bureaucrats have started a new project, which is basically the creation of the United States of Europe. And it's a very gradual thing, it doesn't happen overnight, but what we see is that they're trying to erase competition amongst member states. Right now we have competition. Right now every member state can set their own tax rates. Right now every country can make their own rules. And as a result there is competition. And this competition has been extremely helpful. And the bureaucrats would like to reverse the process. They would like to end tax competition. They would also like to end competition as to the level of regulation. They would like to have a European Union that sets tax rates on a European level. They would like to have a European Union that has the same rules all over the European Union and eradicate competition. They want to establish a cartel. So freedom is lost and prosperity will be lost if that happens. And that's why most libertarians are very skeptical about this project of European integration, because what it really is a cartel. They're trying to form a cartel so that we can't escape them anymore. We can't move anymore to another country to escape high taxes.
Thank you very much for speaking to us.